Hello everybody. I'm here with Dr. Malachi McIntosh, who is the Barbara Pym St. Hilda's Barbara Pym Tutorial Fellow at St. Hilda's currently. Malachi, people won't know anything about you, so could you start off with giving us a little bit of rundown on your background and how you came to be the Barbara Pym Tutorial Fellow?
Sure. I'll try to be short and sweet. I do sometimes ramble, so if I'm talking too long, just wave your
Don't we
hands.
all?
Yeah, keep me in check. So I don't know where in my life to begin. So I suppose, first and foremost, hello everybody who's listened to this. Thank you for the opportunity to chat to you, and also for I suppose, supporting the position that I now hold. My roots are in Birmingham, which is where I live now, Birmingham, UK. And I lived here until the age of 3, which is when I moved to the US, and where I would probably say my journey to this role began. Because as far as I understand it, the schools available to me in Birmingham, had me and my mother stayed here, were not at all the same quality of schooling that I was available, public state-funded schooling in New York, where we ended up. And that is kind of where my educational journey began, and what led me to academia through through quite a convoluted and circuitous route. I lived in New York with my mother till I was 12, and that is where I sort of got a bug for reading. Happened to go again to some skate school that really, really encouraged reading through various different competitions. My mother was a completely obsessive and avid reader of books that I would not touch with a barge pole these days, mainly romance novels, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of them, and not the highbrow ones. But loved those, and was also a very committed Christian. So read a lot of the Bible, and kind of supplementary material, and that is where I sort of learned reading, and also learned through church, actually, the kind of interpretation that one does as an academic scholar of English literature. So the concept that you can have a text, but it contains multiple levels that have to be parsed, and there are various sort of symbolic structures that might unite the whole, and that words can mean multiple things. All of that kind of came through that education, actually. So I went to school in New York, and then Florida, and then did a bachelor's degree. And I did my bachelor's degree in creative writing and philosophy. And when that was done, I thought that that would be really the end of it. But then moved to Boston and met people who wanted to do master's degrees for the first time in my life. Worked at a bookshop called the Browder Bookshop, which is the oldest antiquarian bookshop in Boston. A great place to buy used books for anybody who's anywhere nearby. And all of my peers were roughly the same age that I was, so early 20s. And the vast majority of them wanted to do some kind of further study. And they sort of not really overtly, sort of persuaded me that I should think about doing the same. So I ended up coming back to Britain, where I had not been throughout my entire formal education, to do a master's degree. And the rest was kind of history, in that I did a master's in comparative writing at King's College London. And I had a fantastic tutor there who turned me on again. Throughout the story, other people are telling me to do things. So the idea of PhD study, but more importantly, so introduced me to post-colonial studies. So throughout my education in New York, in Tampa, Florida, where I was, briefly in Britain, I hadn't had any exposure whatsoever to the literature from the world beyond the US and the UK. And when I say the UK, I don't mean the UK, I mean England and a little bit of Ireland. And during that degree, I learned that there was such a thing as Caribbean literature. And my family background, prior to my mother's generation, my grandparents came to Britain from Jamaica and sort of post-48 migration. I had never learned anything about the history of that place or its literature in my entire formal education. I learned nothing about the Caribbean. I had done no literature from sort of the Indian subcontinent, nothing at all from the entire continent of Africa, etc., etc. So I was really, really excited by the fact that I would be exposed to these things, and was so desperately ignorant. I did several embarrassing things that I won't admit to on this, and just really wanted to know more about Caribbean literature. So I wasn't actually taking any modules on it during my master's, but sort of alongside my master's would go into the library, get books down, read, and through that process concocted a PhD proposal, which through the grace of my potential supervisors, they accepted at Warwick University. And that's where I guess, became an academic. The gap between that moment of starting PhD and now is quite a wide one. I was at work for a while. I did my PhD part-time, school teacher at the same time, working in a school in South Croydon, and then working in a school in Wembley. I worked for an educational charity. I then got a fellowship at Warwick. I went to work at Cambridge for a handful of years, then left Cambridge, worked for a think tank. Then I ran a magazine called What's the Theory, which is sort of one of the bigger, if not biggest, magazines of international contemporary literature in Britain. And then, at the end of the story, he discovers this job is advertised. And I went back and forth on it a lot, actually, to be honest. I was at Cambridge. My experience there was mixed. Some things about it I liked, some things I didn't. I wasn't sure if I wanted to come back to academia. I wasn't sure if Oxford would be very similar to what it was like at Cambridge when I was there, which was almost a decade ago. But I was persuaded by the senior tutor to think about it, and applied and was offered the role, and then was unsure, but ultimately took it. And I'm so happy that I did, because St. Hilda's is a very, very different place than where I had been previously. And I'm really blessed with fantastic colleagues. Yeah, it's been great. So that's the long path to St. Hilda's for me.
Did the words Barbara Pym mean anything to you when you first saw the name of the fellowship?
I hadn't been exposed to her work, but it was really strangely serendipitous that there have been several articles about Barbara Pym that sort of appeared at the same time that the fellowship was advertised, and that was a bit strange. So anyhow, it gave me the opportunity to look into Barbara Pym and her work. I mean, the period within which she's working is one which is of endless fascination to me, because it's such an important period in the history of Caribbean writing. So, between and after the wars, that moment of social transformation in Britain, which included decolonization and the arrival of people from the formerly and currently colonized world to Britain, in that moment of reconstruction. And Barbara Pym's world, of course, is not that sort of urban world where the earliest works from that canon of Caribbean South Asian writers comes, but nonetheless helps to kind of capture a Britain that those individuals were coming into. And there's a writer who's a rough contemporary of Pym's, which is Elizabeth Taylor, who a lot of people don't know, and has a similar kind of reputation as writing kind of middle brow, quote unquote, fiction, focused on women, focused on, I guess almost peripheral places within England. And yeah, I really I think Elizabeth Taylor is a spectacular writer. So I guess Barbara Pym and her story, as soon as I found out about them, to me seemed very relevant in the kind of things that I was interested in.
Yeah, and Barbara Pym, as I'm sure you know, was a great fan of Elizabeth Taylor and knew her in person. And that's mentioned in one of the few TV programs about Barbara Pym, which was made in the 1970s, in which she's asked who her favorite authors are, and she specifically mentions Elizabeth Taylor. So I know, Malachi, that you live in Birmingham, because you just said so, and that sometime, and you spend your free time there, and you're in Oxford 3 days a week at St. Hilda's, which is a place that all Barbara Pym members love, because we always have our conference there. At the weekend, I was lucky enough to be shown the new buildings that they've just acquired in North Oxford. And of course, Barbara Pym wrote a novel based in North Oxford called Crampton Hodnet, which we all love. We were just wondering if we can persuade St. Hilda's to plant a monkey puzzle tree in the back garden of one of those houses. That would be fun. So I dare say that they've got a few rooms there that they can use for teaching, and I dare say you'll be having a look around there at some stage as well. And it's going to be, I gather, mostly second year undergraduates who are going to have accommodation in those houses, which brings us neatly on, I think, to the subject of the proposed internship, Barbara Pym Literary Internship, which our members don't really know anything about that yet because it's still at the planning stage. Initially, we thought we might give money towards a travel bursary. Then that plan wasn't ideal. It was too difficult to administer. And in any case, there already are lots of travel bursaries. Then we thought of putting it straight into the prize fund. But after talking to the English department and the development director, we found that the preference was for something a little bit more innovative, which I don't know how much of it was your idea and how much of it was their idea, but maybe you could just talk a bit about how you see it working.
Well, it's definitely the product of teamwork. And I think when you put forward the generous offer to do something for our students, we really wanted to do something that fulfilled the need. So as you mentioned, there are existing travel bursaries or existing funds for sort of outstanding academic performance. But also I was very keen to do something that was literary somehow, because of the attachment to Barbara Pym. We do at Hilda's and possibly at other Oxford colleges, I'm not yet sure, have a conversation with our second year students every year, roughly around the midpoint in their degree, to talk to them about future prospects, what they would like to do. And this year there were a handful of students who wanted to go into literary professions but had no idea how to do that, which is not abnormal. In addition to that, during the course of the year up until that point, I had, as one often does, students come to me and talk about, well, not everyone perhaps, but I do some creative writing myself, publishing short stories mainly so far. And students knowing that come to you and say, I write stories, maybe I write poems, I don't know what to do with them, what would you advise? So we knew that there was a need. We had a lot of students who wanted to move into a profession they knew nothing about. We have a handful of students who have literary aspirations to become writers themselves and don't really know where to start. And that was effectively the spark or the impetus to generate an idea. We thought maybe is there a way we can put these two things together? And we originally, like you, sort of had some thoughts that we discarded. The most significant of which was to maybe look into doing something like a writer's retreat or something like this. But the complication with that is just the fact that, one may or may not actually achieve anything at a writer's retreat, which I had experience. You have a lovely time in different ways. Enjoy some nice lions, but you don't necessarily write as much as you wish you could have.
Totally.
So yes, exactly. So there was the fear that a student might do it, and therefore, and at the end of it, not really feel like they'd accomplished that much. And I, luckily had some contact with an Oxford agency called the Felicity Bryant Agency, who are quite, an interesting player within the field. They're not small. Yeah, exactly. Not small fry by any means, although in a kind of boutique setting. And I said, well, maybe we could look into getting a student some experience in an agency. So if they're a writer or aspire to be a writer, they can understand how that side of the industry works, which is essential, I think, these days. You really kind of need to know your way around a little bit, I think, to be able to navigate the field, which is increasingly crowded. Or if they had aspirations to enter that side of things, editing, working as an agent, etc., they could, get a little bit on their CV and a little bit of experience. So we went to Felicity Bryant and they were keen immediately, which is great. Extraordinarily enthusiastic, which I was, we're all excited to see. And of course, when we came back to you, the proposal. So the thing as it stands now will be 2 weeks in the autumn, an opportunity in the first instance for our second year students, so who are on the cusp of making that decision about what to do next, where they will assist the agency in some of their activities for the autumn, which include preparing for Frankfurt Book Fair, but also hopefully have a sort of a contained piece of work for them to do themselves, for the opportunity to see a mini project from beginning to end, and therefore to kind of counteract that fear that we had that they can go through it and not have anything to show for it. So that's the goal. And a nice thing which we spoke about when we were kind of hashing out the idea is that we know that Barbara Pym herself you know, had her own challenges with that side of the literary world. Not in the writing, but certainly in the circulation and the esteem. So we thought it was a bit of, you know, it was nicely poetic for this, to give someone the chance to navigate those things better.
Yes. You've got something in common with Barbara Pym too, because she was the, as you know, she was the assistant editor of a journal called Africa, which was the journal of the International African Institute where she worked. Yeah, so, and you've also got something in common with a lot of our members, because a lot of them, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but we've got almost as many members in America as we have in Britain. And their conference is held every year in Boston. So I guess they'll all be going to look out that antiquarian bookshop in their free time when they go there next month.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. Great. Well, tell Ken and Joyce that I sent them.
So that's good. Well, thank you very much, Malachi, for this. And I'll look forward to talking to you again in person before too long.